bomb.
However, there's a lot of people that think there were bombs planted on both those buildings.
No.
When they got that much fuel in them, shit.
No, the fuel explodes on impact, as we all saw. But
It was the
for
fire
some
that brought it
reason,
down.
never in the history of high-rise buildings has any high-rise steel building ever collapsed due to a fire. But there were, except 3 times in history, and they all happened on the same day at the same spot.
Yeah.
That's weird, because building number 7 was the one they never talk about, was the one that collapsed, pancaked, even though it wasn't hit by an airplane, had a little bit of damage from the falling debris from the Twin Towers, and it had a little bit of fire on it. And yet, at 5 o'clock that afternoon, you watch the videos, it just goes, and everybody's like, how the fuck did that happen? And it never got, it wasn't even in the 9/11 Commission report. They just, we're just not going to deal with that one. Yeah, the buildings were fucked. They were mostly unoccupied, the Twin Towers. Nobody wanted to rent those things. It was all just mostly government offices and a few financial services, banks and stuff like that. But for the most part, most of the floors were unoccupied.
Really?
Yeah. And Larry Silverstein, who bought the whole World Trade Center just 6 months before, he took out massive insurance policies on the whole thing, and he made billions of dollars.
I heard one of them
Billions.
insured one of the buildings.
Now, the whole center was,
The
the
whole
whole
thing?
thing, yeah.
What
He owned the whole
bank did
thing.
you have to?
He bought it from the Port Authority, New York Port Authority, and he had it insured to against terrorist attacks, you know, because in '93 the World Trade Center was bombed.
Yeah.
Larry Silverstein is on video giving an interview to some news channel, and he was talking. They asked him about building number 7, the one that collapsed later that afternoon, and he said, "Yeah, you know, there was just been so much loss of life today in the fire department." They said, "You know, do you want us to go out and put out the fire?" He said, "No, let's just pull it." And pull it is a phrase meaning to take down a building in the controlled demolition industry. But you don't just do that in an hour. Plant all those explosives on a building to have a controlled demolition where it just collapses in its own footprint. It takes weeks and really expert engineers, you know, who know what the fuck they're doing. Yeah, and yet building number 7 just went, and it crimped in the middle, just in the roof, you know, because that's how they keep it from falling onto other buildings, and then you really have problems. And it just went, and you're just like, how do you explain that? And they said, oh yeah, the fire. Yeah, it was the fire. The fire. There was no fire only on one floor. Okay, and they said, well, you know, it must have collapsed some of the central columns. You know, and again, this is the only time in history of high-rise steel buildings that they ever collapsed, pancaking, due to fires.
So what are you saying?
There were bombs on the buildings. And you look at the documentaries. We should have a whole episode of the Nation's News about this. But you have to watch the documentaries. And all these documentaries use the actual news footage that was there on 9/11, because there's plenty of news crews all over the place. And they're interviewing fire people and people on the scene and going, yeah, fuck, there was a bomb in the basement and we were all blown apart. And that was before the second plane hit the other building. And we were all just, and you just hear all these eyewitness accounts of bombs going off in the foundation, because you have to take out the foundation first in order to destroy the whole support system. And then when you watch the videos in slow motion of the Twin Towers, you know, the planes that came in here, you know, because they came in pretty high. And then when you see the explosion when the collapse started, and way the fuck down here you see these poofs coming out, you know, just, which is what happens when you see, like, they take down an old casino in Vegas or something. They got it, you know, and it's all timed, it's sequential. Boom, 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 boom. And you hear these fire
departments. The weight buckling them too.
And yeah, but not if it's starting up here, it wouldn't have the
It
explosions.
depends
50,
on how many
50
floors have come down already. Now
no,
the weight,
that
protection was not made to carry that much weight and gravity.
Hadn't even started, and there were already boom, 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 booms coming out below. Okay. Plus,
I'd have to watch it again.
Yes, you have to watch these things. Okay. We'll make it a special episode of Nation's News, because either way you look at it, 9/11 was a conspiracy. Okay. It was either the ragheads, because that's a conspiracy. Okay. Or there were bombs on there, and they're not telling us the true story. Okay.
To get past what they wanted to pass.
They wanted to go to war.
Yeah.
Okay. They had to go to war, or else what would the Bush presidency have been? He was the new Roosevelt. It was the new Pearl Harbor. That's what they said the very day they go.
Yeah.
This is Pearl Harbor. And then you look at some of the documents, and the weird thing is that even though the planes did a lot of damage, there's no doubt about that. There was a lot of fuel burning, and everything else is burning. But then after you look at it, the smoke was just smoldering. It was just black smoke, which means just a smoldering fire, not a raging inferno fire, unless there were additional accelerants involved.
They were trying to save the heat from all that.
The heat from all that melted the huge fucking beams and all that stuff. And it might weaken it to a certain extent.
Yeah, but then it should have came down right there where
exactly. And the center columns of the way the World Trade Centers were built, they were built around a center column of nothing but huge vertical steel beams. Where'd they all go? Okay, if it pancaked, it would have left all these vertical columns around it.
Yeah.
But they were all blown to smithereens. As you know, there was only like this much left of the building after
this. They showed some of that stuff.
And all the beams were all basically, when they fell, they were all at like 30-foot lengths. And when the fire department was cleaning up, the whole rescue operation, for days and even weeks afterwards, there was nothing but this molten pit they couldn't get to. And the only thing that can cause that are accelerants. In other words, things like thermite, which melts steel like that. Okay, and that's what's used when they need to do a controlled demolition.
Get the fuck out of here!
It's a spy. Fucking moth works for the CIA. But the only thing that can burn that kind of metal and cut it and weaken it that fast is thermite. And when they got there, they saw all these. The beams were melted on every end of. That means something had to be attached to those beams, and the ragheads couldn't pull that shit off. Okay,
government.
It had to be a government, or even a foreign government. So you guys got to watch these documentaries. There's quite a few of them, and it's not like it's never happened in history before. Hitler burnt down the Reichstag building and blamed it on his enemies, but it was proven later that he did it in order to bring himself to power and take over full power in Germany. He blamed it on the communists, and it was actually he and his henchmen that burned down the Reichstag building. But they used that as their cause for coming to power as the Nazis. And Pearl Harbor, if you've studied Pearl Harbor, we basically goaded Japan into attacking us, and we had cracked their code and didn't warn Admiral Kimmel and Admiral Short at Pearl Harbor. Fucking George Marshall, who was the Secretary of War at the time, he sent him a note by Western Union. It said, "You will be attacked." It got there later that day. So, sometimes our government pulls little fast ones on us.